I was trying to think of two scriptures which embodied certain characteristics of a biblical father. Not an extensive or exhaustive list of scripture passages. Jesus claims, after he washed the disciples' feet on Maundy Thursday, in John 13:34, "A new command I give you, love one another as I've loved you." So you must love one another. Jesus teaches us how to truly love. In our families, in our churches, fathers should model loving behavior. Another verse that leaves an impression on me is 1 Timothy 5:8. Paul writes, "Anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied their faith and is worse than a non-believer." I don't think it was Paul's intent to run someone down who was going through hard times. But he's making it clear that we need to make sure that our families have the necessities. Paul doesn't use the term father, but normally, biblically speaking, that's the father's role, to provide. Our aim should be that those under our care have the necessities and love and live in a loving and safe environment. If that's not the case right now, we should be working toward that goal. One man in U.S. history who I respect greatly, who I think of when I think of these two biblical verses I quoted, is President U.S. Grant. Grant went to West Point, where he met and married a Southern belle. His father-in-law was a slave owner and gave him a slave. Grant owned the slave for about a year, but guilt was eating at him. He didn't have much money, but he knew that he had to free the slave given to him. He went to the courthouse to make the slave a free person. While in the lobby of the courthouse, a person who knew Grant offered him the equivalent of $30,000 for the slave. Grant turned down the offer, even though he was poor at the time. He signed the slave over to freedom. He did what was right, opposed to what was financially beneficial. Now, years later, Grant shined during the U.S. Civil War. He kept climbing the ladder until he was the highest ranking general in the Western theater of the war. The nickname given to him by the South was Unconditional Surrender Grant. What a great nickname, Unconditional Surrender Grant. Today, many people think that Grant was only successful because he had more foes than the Confederate forces. That's not true at all. Grant was the aggressor, fighting against fortified positions on the opponent's home soil, and he received far less casualties than the Confederates did. Far less than General Lee. He was really good with speed and troop movements. Grant was the first American general who understood modern warfare. Abraham Lincoln eventually brought Grant from the west to the east to finish the war. What normally happened before in the east was that the North would invade Virginia, Lee would win a battle, then the Union Army would retreat back north. But Grant changed the game. See, when he invaded Virginia and he lost a battle, he didn't retreat back. He removed the focus from individual battles and put the focus on overarching campaigns. His thought was, well, Lee might win a battle, but I'm going to win the campaign that wins the war. And Grant kept attacking Lee from this angle to that angle. Lee might win a battle, but he was losing his army doing so. When Lee surrendered at Appomattox, the war was essentially over. Grant gave Lee's men very favorable terms. He was thinking about the good of the country, He even let them return home with their guns. Grant decided to run for president and won the presidential election of 1868. He served 2 terms. Economically, Grant was not a good president. He put his trust in corrupt people, and the discernment that he showed as a general, he did not choose in picking his cabinet. However, socially, Grant may have been one of the best presidents, one of the most progressive presidents we have ever had. He is without precedent in fighting for the rights of the oppressed. And although it's not in the same context, I'm reminded of Jesus' command to love when thinking about his social changes. First, Grant supported and helped pass the 15th Amendment, which prohibits the denial of voting rights on the basis of race. The freedmen and the ex-slaves could now vote. Second, no other president, including modern presidents, have attacked the Ku Klux Klan as Grant did. He was vicious toward them. Third, the number of black politicians holding public office was the highest in history of our country under President Grant. That includes modern times. It's amazing. When people talk about civil rights, normally Grant's not mentioned. To him, integrity and character mattered more than skin color. He was an extremely strong advocate for the Native Americans, and also keep in mind that he was the commanding general of the army that ended slavery. I don't think there's anyone in the history of our country that did more for civil rights than President Grant did. He reminds me of the parable of the Good Samaritan, which teaches us that everybody is our neighbor, not just those who live next to us, not just those that go to church with us, but everyone is our neighbor, and we're called to love them. Toward the end of his life, Grant invested all his money with a corrupt investor, and he lost it due to a Ponzi scheme. And later he was diagnosed with terminal throat cancer. Leaving his wife as so many years prior weighed extremely heavy on Grant. He accepted dying, but leaving his wife in poor financial shape filled him with grief. Mark Twain was a friend of Grant and offered him 70% royalties if he wrote his autobiographical memoirs. This was so that his wife would have money to live on once he died. I'm very inspired by this part of Grant's life, where he showed love and care for his wife, and where his downright determination is illustrated. It embodies what Paul wrote in 1 Timothy 5:8. Anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than any unbeliever. Grant worked on his autobiographical account of the war night and day. It literally was a race against death. I've seen pictures of the sickly Grant writing his book. A normal person would have been in bed. 5 days before Grant finished, 5 days before Grant died, he finished. To me, that's astonishing. The common person would have been on morphine, resting, but he was determined to finish that book. Imagine how sick he was 5 days before his death from cancer, and he was still working until he finished. And he wasn't just writing any novel, he was writing true accounts. And he had to keep track of where this unit of troop was, this division of troop, this brigade. He had to keep track of the enemy's movements. It was a large thing to undertake. Grant's willpower is something to behold. That's how a father is supposed to care for his family. That's how a father is supposed to care for his wife. Even when he was dying, his wife's welfare was a top concern. The book was an instant success. Julia Grant, his wife, received what would be equivalent to $16 million for her husband's work while he was dying. Ulysses Grant was not perfect, but he's a powerful reminder of what one can do through sheer determination and commitment. And that's a lesson in itself for fathers to hand down to their children. When I look at young people in society, there's so many men who don't know how to honor their wives. And many young women settle for men who are selfish, who don't treat them right. Marriage is the most important human relationship. In the Bible, it's the only relationship where two become one. And I believe it's essential for a father to teach his son how to treat his future wife, and to teach his daughter not to just settle, but to marry a Christian man with character and integrity. And the best way for a father to teach this lesson is by how he treats his own wife. The Bible is filled with instructions and responsibilities for fathers. Fathers and mothers are the most impressionable and influential people in the lives of their children. Far more than any pastor, any actor, any teacher, any cartoon. Children who go to church with their father weekly have a higher probability of taking their own kids to church when they grow up and have a family. Most Christian psychologists claim that a child's orientation is set by age 13. That doesn't mean that we're either saved or unsaved by age 13. It's about how we see the world. We either see the world through a godly worldview or a secular worldview. It's set by the age of 13. Now, just because a child has a secular worldview doesn't mean that it can't be changed. Nothing is impossible with God. But it's certainly easier to plant a tree correctly the first time. It's imperative that fathers instruct their children in the faith early. Not just mothers, but fathers also. The idea of mothers doing all the instructing is not biblical. Proverbs 22:6 claims, "Start children off on the way they should go, and even when they're old, they will not turn from it." I have an extremely high respect for mothers. Always have, because of my mom. My father gave my mom an ultimatum to end her pregnancy or to leave. She left him and she gave birth to me. My mother raised me. She was fully there as a parent, never missed a game, a science fair, a teacher's meeting, or a boosters meeting. She took care of her wheelchair-bound mom in our house, and she owned and administrated a nursing home. The older I get, the more I wonder, how in the world did my mom do it? My respect for my mom causes me to respect greatly other mothers. I'm not downplaying the importance of mothers at all. However, there is something about the nature of faith being shared and adopted from one generation to the other that makes the voice of a Christian father irreplaceable. That's how God set up the family unit. The words of faith from a father transmit to the children. Paul writes in Ephesians 6:4, "Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. We live in a culture with a distorted view of masculinity. I believe that only God decides what sex and gender people are. It's not uncommon for the secular world to call those with my viewpoint closed-minded or toxic. It baffles my mind how a father who doesn't want his daughter to use the same restroom as a male can be called toxic. It's upside down to me. I applaud the father who stands up for his daughter. And then we have some people that think masculinity depends on how good of a fighter you are, or how fast you can drive, how well you can fire a firearm. That's nonsense. According to the Bible, true masculinity is humbling oneself before the Lord, fearing the Lord, and living to glorify Him. True masculinity is staying true to your marriage vows and honoring your wife, for better or worse, loving her. True masculinity is being a Christian father and grandfather. True masculinity is living with faith, love, generosity, compassion, integrity, and character. It's making sure our loved ones are provided for. There's nothing toxic or closed-minded about true masculinity, about biblical masculinity. In fact, if the secular world paid more attention to the biblical views of being a man, communities around our country would improve significantly. As Christians and as a church, let us support and always be praying for the Christian fathers around among us.